Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
Hello, Old Sports, and welcome to another episode of the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. I'm your co-host, Dan Newman. I am joined, as always, by my brother and co-host, Andrew Newman. Andrew, how are you doing on this fine evening?
I'm doing all right, Dan. It's unfortunately, for being right on the verge of Memorial Day weekend here in Connecticut, it was about 48 degrees and pouring rain all day today. So a fine early March day on this May 22nd.
Exactly. And this probably won't air for another week or two at least. But Andrew and I are just a sort of a moment in time.
We don't need to talk about that. I'm never going to talk about that again in my life. A guy at work came by to me today and he just said, no words. I said, yeah, I'm never going to speak about this ever again. So
it is the day after Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Let's just put it that way. So,
yes. I'm starting to think this sports history thing is not a bad way to go. You can't really get your heart broken by things that happened 75 years ago.
That's a good point. So Andrew and I are we've done quite a few of these episodes where we travel back in time to talk about a specific year in the history of American sports. We've done the 20s. We did 1920. We did 1923. We did 41. Which was obviously, among other things, the year of DiMaggio's streak and Ted Williams hitting 400. And then we've done a bunch from the 80s and beyond. We did 82, we did 84, we did 86, and then we went all the way up to 98. But we haven't done anything in sort of the what's commonly considered the post-war period, that 40-year period between 1941 and 1981. We hadn't done any episodes in that time frame yet, so I think it'll be good to delve a little bit here into 3/4 of a century ago and get into 1950.
And it's also very funny that this is the post-war period, and we're already in another war by 1950.
That's a fair point.
And the one thing I want to say, and this was, I think I mentioned this, I definitely thought it when we did the research for 1980. This is especially a pain in the butt to research for, because you search boxing in 1950, you search anything 1950, and the first results you get are the whole decade.
That's a good point. It's
a little bit annoying at first. You have to do a little extra step of making sure you're not, you're honing in on the year and not just the decade.
Yes, absolutely. And on the topic of research, I've also got some books here that I might need to temporarily pause so I can adjust and bring some books up to the desk. So this was a year with, some interesting things, 2 mergers in 2 different major sports, which we'll talk about. It was the heart of one of the greatest Yankee dynasties of all time. No Olympics, but some interesting developments in some of the individual sports as well. So kind of looking forward to getting into it here.
Yeah. It's it might not have one, although there is actually one story that's I think very interesting, but there might not be any major it's one of the most famous football seasons of all time. But there's going to be a lot to talk about like a lot of different things to get somewhat deep into.
And I guess we should maybe issue, although it's not as relevant when we're not in the Super Bowl years, but maybe we should issue our standard disclaimer about what it is to be in 1950.
Seasons that end in 1950, except, yeah, it really is. In this, it's easier. So it's basically the NBA and NHL seasons and college basketball seasons we'll be talking about are the 1949, 1950 seasons. So if they ended in 1950, same thing with baseball. Obviously, it's easy, 1950. Football, I'm sure the 1950 NFL season was over before New Year's Day.
It was.
But yeah, and like college football, we'll talk about, the bowl games that were played on New Year's Day 1951 are 1950 season. So it's easier. You're right. It's easier without the NFL going into January and then later on in February.
So I thought that sometimes we tend to try and do these in roughly chronological order. I think with the exception of the 20s and 40s that are really, really baseball heavy, we've tended to always end with football and usually start with baseball, but for the modern ones. But I thought that this time maybe we would start with the NBA because this, depending on how you look at it, is actually the very first season of the National Basketball Association.
Yeah, so it's the NBA officially recognizes, and I think it makes sense to recognize the 47-48 season or 46-47 season.
46-47, yeah.
The 46-47 season as the first season, even though technically those first 3 years the league was the BAA, the Basketball Association of America, and then this 1949-1950 season was the first year that they had merged, joined, whatever the official, they had combined to some degree with the NBL, and the NBA was officially christened, but the NBA, the modern day NBA, recognizes those first 3 years as NBA seasons.
So the two leagues that merged to form, as you said, and we a couple times here we're going to call back to previous episodes that we did. We did an episode with very early on. We talked about expansion and rival leagues in basketball, and those were we talked a lot about the merger of the BAA and the NBL. The NBL had been around since the early 40s and was really the league that was located in more Midwestern cities and what you might even consider to be small towns. Whereas the BAA, while certainly not immune from your Rochesters and your Fort Waynes and those types, they did have the major eastern cities, New York, Philly, Boston, DC, but the NBL had some of the larger stars, including George Mikan, although George Mikan had jumped to the BAA the year before. And so the sort of impetus behind the merger was we will combine some of the star players of the NBL with some of the major East Coast cities of the BAA.
And the thing I find interesting with the NBL is you look and most of these teams, Akron, and I mean a lot of them are decent sized cities, Buffalo, Dayton, Ohio, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, and then it's in the western part, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, small towns like Hammond, Indiana, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, but then the Denver Nuggets, which is kind of interesting and it's not the modern day Denver Nuggets, but just interesting that the next closest team is Waterloo, Iowa, and then there's a team in Denver.
So this may be the only, and I'm going to explain this now, and I'm going to, it's interesting. Let's just say that. The NBA in what?
Have you ever seen what the Denver Nuggets? The Denver Nuggets were actually around starting in 1932. They were the Denver Nuggets for 4 seasons. Have you ever? Well, actually, a couple of times. Am I taking your point?
No, go ahead and tell people about this.
So the Denver Nuggets came in, and a lot of these basketball teams were barnstorming teams first or whatever. The 1932 to 1938, they were the Denver Safeway Pigs. Then in 39 and 40, they were the Nuggets. 41 to 44, the American Legion, which it seems like pandering. 46 to 50, they were the Nuggets again. And 50 to 51, they were the Denver Refiners. In the middle, though, Denver Nuggets, 1945 to 1946, the Denver Ambrose Jelly Makers.
Yeah, just and we did this last time, but this I think was the league that had the Red Man tobaccos in it. In 48-49, the last year of the NBL, they had such teams as the Detroit Vagabond Kings, the Oshkosh All-Stars, Tri-City Blackhawks, and I have to figure out where this team played, the Hammond Calumet Buccaneers.
Is that Calumet, like outside of Chicago? Calumet?
Oh, is that just outside of
I believe
Chicago? So George Mikan, the first great star in professional basketball, and this is great too. You had, hold on, okay, yeah, in 48-49, the Detroit Vagabond Kings disband during the season and are taken over by the Dayton Wrens, who not only assume their spot on the schedule, but also their record. So, so they are a combined 16-43 on the season. So going into 49-50, this is what the NBA is. It is 10 teams that had previously been in the BAA, and that's the New York Knicks, the Washington Capitals, Philadelphia Warriors, Baltimore Bullets, and Boston Celtics. They are all in the Eastern Division. Then you have 5 teams in the Central Division, the St. Louis Bombers, the Chicago Stags, Fort Wayne Pistons, Rochester Royals, and Minneapolis Lakers. So that's 10 teams. There are 7 new teams in the newly formed NBA, 6 of which come from the NBL, and that's the Indianapolis Olympians, the Anderson Packers, Tri-City Blackhawks, Sheboygan Redskins, not Redskins like the Washington Redskins, all one word, but actually 2 different names, Redskins, which sort of like Red Sox. And
it's almost more racist.
A little bit, yeah, yeah. And I should also clarify that, I'm sorry, the Indianapolis Olympians were actually not. They were an expansion team. Then the Waterloo Hawks and the Denver Nuggets. The 7th team that's new is the Syracuse Nationals, who had been in the BAA the year before. I'm sorry, in the NBL the year before. They have on their team the guy who'd been the Rookie of the Year of the NBL, who ends up going on to be one of the great players of early professional basketball, and that's Dolph Schayes, who is with Syracuse all the way up into the early 60s when they moved to Philadelphia and become the 76ers. Syracuse is in the Eastern Division, but they play a schedule as if they were in the Western Division. So,
I knew you were going to bring that up. You love when teams play weird schedules. You love that Seahawks Bucks thing from the late 70s.
So they play 64 games, even though all of the other teams in their division play 68. All of the teams in the Central Division play 68, and most of the teams in the West play 62, although for some reason, Tri-Cities, Anderson, and Indianapolis all play an extra 2 games against each other, I guess like a round-robin type of thing, so they play 64 games. So every team plays either 62, 64, and 68, and the Nationals in the Eastern Division win their division, but the reason that they win their division is because they get to play the vast majority of their games against the much weaker Western Division.
Yeah, I feel like this is almost basketball in 1950 equals pro football in 1930 equals pro baseball in 1880. Like that seems to be the staggered in terms of like organization and league stability and league structure.
1949-50. I'm just looking here. Some information about where some of the teams played. The Fort Wayne Pistons played in a high school. Syracuse played in the State Fair Coliseum. Baltimore plays in a Baltimore Coliseum. These locations all hold between sort of 5,000. But then the Lakers play at the Minneapolis Auditorium, which holds 10,000, and then Indianapolis is actually the star as far as attendance is concerned. They play at the Butler Fieldhouse, which holds 17,000, and only New York and Boston in their respective gardens can match that.
Wow, it's interesting, and that I think that Butler Fieldhouse is the Fieldhouse that's depicted in Hoosiers, which actually only takes place a few years after this.
Exactly. So this is, I think, the only time that I've ever seen this in sports where you have three divisions and a grand total of 12 of the 17 teams make the playoffs. So just about 2/3. And the Western Division, the one that's made up entirely of the one expansion team, and then all of the former NBL teams. The champion is in fact the expansion team. It's the 19 of that division in the 1949-50 Indianapolis Olympians playing in the Butler Fieldhouse. Nobody on that team really all that really noteworthy. Their best player is probably their center, who's a rookie by the name. He's the rookie of the year in the league, actually, a guy by the name of Alex Groza. And I think he ends up getting kicked out of basketball at some point as related to one of the gambling scandals, because he plays 2 seasons. And then, he's later implicated in having been involved in point shaving while at Kentucky. And we're going to talk a little bit more about gambling scandals in a moment here. But yeah, the guy plays 2 years and then is banned for life by the NBA after being implicated in a point shaving scandal at Kentucky. So that's the Western Division champion, the Indianapolis Olympians. I'll pause for a second, and then we can get into the other 2 division champions.
Yeah, and it's very strange when you look at the playoff bracket for how this worked. It's like unbalanced in terms of I think the East Division basically got a bye almost from the division finals, but.
Yeah, they did, and I don't know. They did based on winning percentage, and that was Syracuse.
Okay.
They were 51-13, whereas the Minneapolis Lakers and the Rochester Royals were both 51-17. And really, probably those 2 teams in the Central are probably the 2 best teams. The Royals are led by a couple of future Hall of Famers, Bob DeVries, who is he's a 4-time All-Star and 5-time All-BAA/NBA honoree. He's their point guard. He's one of the first great point guards in NBA history. They got another guy named Bobby Wanzer, who's the shooting guard, future Hall of Famer, and Arnie Rison, who actually ends up going on and winning a couple NBA championships with the Celtics in the late 50s. So they're really good. They also have as a backup point guard a young guy by the name of Red Holzman, who you might be familiar with, later the great coach of the two championship Knicks teams. So that's Rochester. And then the Lakers are George Mikan's team. Mikan, the great star of the Minneapolis Lakers. He's in his second year in the BAA/NBA, and then they have a rookie forward by the name of Vern Mickelson, who ends up being one of the great Minneapolis Lakers as well. I'd actually like to do an episode at some point on the Minneapolis Lakers. And then they also have a guy, and we talked about this guy in Memoriam a couple years ago. They have a forward on the Minneapolis Lakers by the name of Bud Grant.
Oh, and that's the future Vikings coach, right? We talked about
future Viking coach who brings them to 4 Super Bowls. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is Mikan's second year, I believe, right?
He jumped from the Chicago team in the NBL to the Minneapolis Lakers the year before. So it's his second year with Minneapolis.
Okay. And he leads in pretty much every statistical category you would expect him to lead in, from what I remember here. Yeah, he leads in points. He leads in points per game. He leads in, I guess, field goals, field goal attempts, 2-point field goals, which is the same. Free throws, free throw attempts, personal fouls, win shares, defensive win shares. It's basically everything except like assists and shooting percentage and a couple other things, but he leads in almost every shooting related category.
Yeah, exactly. So the playoffs, like we said, there's a tiebreaker to see which division is going to get the bye. Syracuse, by virtue of their weak schedule, is the number 1 seed in the East, so they make it out of the East. Minneapolis makes it out of the Central, and then Indianapolis is actually upset by the Anderson team, the Anderson Packers, and my guess is there's nobody particularly memorable on that team either. Yeah, I've never heard of any of these guys. So, in what I guess you would call sort of the semifinals, the Syracuse edges out the Anderson team in. Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. Syracuse is the one who gets the bye. Minneapolis edges out the Anderson team. Minneapolis sweeps its first 3 playoff series. They sweep Chicago and Fort Wayne in the Central, and then they beat Anderson of the Western Division, and then they go on to play the Dolph Schayes-led Syracuse Nationals in the very first official NBA Finals.
Yeah, and this is the second championship for them, right? Because they had won the year before.
They had won the previous year. They had won the BAA championship, and so and then this year they win in the expanded 49-50 NBA against Syracuse. And if you give me a second here, I can just get a little bit more detail on those finals.
And it's interesting because every other series, the divisional semifinals, the divisional finals, and then the one semifinal, they're all best 2 out of 3. And then so there's not even a 3 out of 5. And then this is a 4 out of 7 between Minneapolis and Syracuse. And it's Minneapolis who wins in 6 games.
Yeah, Minneapolis wins in 6 games. Just bear with me for a second here.
An NBA Finals that started on April 8th, by the
way. Nationals hold the home court advantage. They open up in Syracuse. Syracuse had only lost 1 game on the road, or at home rather, all season. The Nats have a 34-1 record, like I said. The Nationals, actually, Bud Grant hits a hook shot to tie the game, and then Al Servey, who's the player coach for Syracuse, gets the ball and drives the hoop, gets blocked by Mikan. He feels he's fouled, but then Minneapolis gets the ball, and a guy named Tiger Harrison hits a 40-foot shot at the buzzer to give Minneapolis the first game. In the second game, somehow it gets out that Mikan is bothered by smoke, and so a bunch of guys show up and start smoking cigars. It allows Syracuse to win the second game, but then they go back to Minneapolis and win game 3, win game 4. They actually lose game 5. I think that game's back in Syracuse.
Yeah.
But then in game 6, they go back to Minneapolis, April 23rd, 1950. It says here, game 6 brought a round of fistfights and the ejection of Nationals player coach Al Cervi. Mikan finished with 40 points in that game 6. They're a long way from issuing MVPs, but had there been an MVP in those days, George Mikan would probably have been MVP both of the league and of the NBA Finals series.
And just to kind of, because I know we're going to get close to done with the NBA here, this is such an anomaly of a year. By the next year, they're down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They're down to 11 teams by the next year. So 6 of those teams are gone. And the 11 teams are the Philadelphia Warriors, Boston Celtics, New York Knicks, Syracuse Nationals, Baltimore Bullets, Washington Capitals, Minneapolis Lakers, Rochester Royals, Fort Wayne Pistons, Indianapolis Olympians, and Tri-City Blackhawks. So the Anderson Packers of the world are gone. The Sheboygan Redskins are gone. The Waterloo Hawks are gone. Most of that Western Division is gone.
Yeah, and most of those teams end up sticking around. So I'm just looking here. The Philadelphia Warriors, they're the precursor to the present-day Warriors. Obviously, the Celtics and the Nationals, or Celtics and the Knicks, rather, are what they are even to this day. Syracuse Nationals are the forerunner to the present-day Philadelphia 76ers. The Baltimore team eventually folds. I don't know exactly when. That is not the present-day Washington, D.C. team, nor is the Washington Capitals. In fact, I think the Washington Capitals fold midway through that 50-51 season. And then out west, the Lakers are the Lakers, the Pistons are the Pistons, even though they all would move cities. Rochester Royals, fittingly enough, are the present-day Sacramento Kings. Tri-City Blackhawks, I think, go out after the following. Oh no, they're not. Are the Tri-City Blackhawks the forerunners of the
St. Louis Hawks?
Okay, and then that's the Atlanta Hawks. I thought maybe they went obsolete because I knew they drafted Bob Cousy, but he never played for them. But I think there's further shenanigans or reasons why Cousy doesn't end up on the Tri-City Blackhawks. And then the Indianapolis Olympians, they fold at some point. Yeah, they fold in the early 50s. But, you know, the vast majority of those teams end up being long-term NBA teams. So I guess maybe real quick before we get into the college sports, maybe we could do the NHL real quick.
Sure. So we're in the original 6 era, and I'll spare everybody the normal colloquy on why the original 6 is a misnomer and just move along here. But it's the, your 6 classic teams, your 6, and we're still going to be in that era for another 17 years or so. The league, it's the first year they play 70 games. They go up from 60 to 70 games. You play every other team 14 times. This is a interesting year because there's an interesting going on this year. Did you know about this? What this is the first?
No. What is it?
This is the first season that the NHL decides to paint the ice. So
Oh,
the
I did
ice,
see this. I did
that
see
the
this.
ice is white instead of just normal frozen water color. That it's white, and it's still I'm sure it's brighter today than it was back then, but still that same kind of look in terms of it's not just frozen water ice. The Stanley Cup champions are the Detroit beats the Rangers in 7 games in a playoffs that was, I believe, the Rangers did not play any games in the Stanley Cup final at Madison Square Garden because the circus was in town. Most of the games were played at either Olympia. 5 of the 7 games were played at Olympia Stadium in Detroit. 2 of them were played at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. So the Rangers almost win the Stanley Cup despite not being able to play at all on their home ice in the championship. I'm just looking for awards and things like that. Regular season.
The scoring leader was Gordie Howe, who was a great player who would play in professional hockey up to the
70s.
The 80s. His last year was with the Hartford Whalers in 79-80. I think he ends up playing with at least a couple of his kids. Guy plays professional hockey in 5 different decades if you count 1980. He's the scoring leader in Detroit, and obviously, like you said, he's a Stanley Cup champion. One of the first great seasons of Gordie Howe. He had come into the NHL for in 46, 47. So this is what is 4th season in the National Hockey League. Like you said, they beat the Rangers in a 7-game Stanley Cup. The MVP of the league is a guy by the name of Milt Schmidt of the Boston Bruins. This is during the time, and I'm going to say it because it's our ethnicity. He is part of the famous Kraut line of the Boston Bruins, along with his teammates. Hold on here. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It was also 5 years after World War II. They weren't that sensitive about being polite to the Germans. There were groups who got it worse, but
yes, exactly. It consists of Schmidt, left wing Woody Dumart, and right wing Bobby Bauer. So just real quick, I have a book here. It's by a guy named Brian McFarlane. It's a history of the Stanley Cup. I found it in a used bookstore. I think it goes through about 1973. But it's the series was tied after 2 games were played. The Wings made some changes. They called in Terry Sawchuk, who is a Hall of Fame goalie, I believe, Claire Raglan and others, and outclassed New York 4-0. Rangers fought back with 2 overtime victories and were on the verge of a cup victory. Then, so the Rangers are up 3-2. But then Detroit wins Game 6 5-4, and then in Game 7, the late Rangers, and we may have mentioned this, the Rangers lose in the second period of a sudden death overtime to give the Red Wings the Stanley Cup. And this was a period when the Rangers were, this was kind of, they're into their curse. It's 10 years after their last Stanley Cup in 1940, 1940. But they had been to the they'd actually not been a very good team, and they're actually not a very good team this year. They're 28-31-11, but they make it all the way to Game 7 overtime of Stanley Cup Finals, Game 7 double overtime of a Stanley Cup Finals, and after this, they really kind of hit the skids. They don't make it back to the playoffs for another 6 years. So this is kind of, in a lot of ways, the Rangers' last good chance at a Stanley Cup until at least the 70s, when they go up against Boston in the early 70s. So, but it really is the midst of the Detroit Red Wings. I think this is what the Red Wings are in the midst of winning 4 straight cups here, I think.
Oh, look, and this one also, it should be pointed out, Gordie Howe gets hurt in the first game of the first round of the playoffs and is not available for the rest of the playoffs.
So he doesn't even play in the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. So the Red Wings won in 50. This was their first of. They won in 50. They don't win the next year. Then they win in the years ending 52, 54, 55. So they win 1, 2. They win 4 in 6 seasons.
Mm-hmm. So that being the case, we should probably just briefly mention some of the others. Like I said, Terry Sawchuk, who is a Hall of Fame goalie. Although according to this, he doesn't actually play in the book says he did, but his stats said he didn't. So that's a little interesting.
Yeah, I just saw something on that. Let me see if I can find it. It said something about his name being on the cup, but Terry Sawchuk played in 7 games in 1950 because Harry Loomey was injured. Sawchuk was not available for the playoffs because he was helping the AHL Indianapolis Capitals win the Calder Cup. Instead, Harry McQuestion was called up as the spare goalie for the playoffs. McQuestion's name was engraved on the Stanley Cup, but he never played in the NHL. McQuestion was removed from the Stanley Cup when it was redone during the 1957-1958 season.
So, first of all, this doesn't give me a lot of, and Brian McFarlane, who has likely been dead for many, many years, but it kind of doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the rest of this book. If he cites a guy as leading a team to a Stanley Cup victory who very clearly just didn't even play in it. But they've got some other Hall of Famers here. Ted Lindsay, who's left wing, and he's another one who's a Hall of Famer, NHL 100th anniversary team. So, again, as we sort of caveat this a lot, not our area of expertise, but this is the beginning stages of one of the great, and especially one of the great non-Montreal dynasties in NHL hockey history, especially during the original 6 era. I don't know for sure, but this Red Wings of the 50s might be the best dynasty that's not the Canadiens of the original 6 era.
Yeah, that's probably true.
And then the only other thing I wanted to mention in the ice hockey realm is that this is the 3rd year of the NCAA men's hockey team, men's hockey tournament. It is the at this point, it really is the Frozen Four because it is only a 4-team tournament, but it is won by Colorado College in a victory over the Boston University Terriers. BU, I would have to say here, does not put up a great effort. Colorado College 13, Boston University 4.
Interesting. That's I did not realize that was the 3rd year you said of the
3rd
NCAA,
year of the tournament. Third year of the tournament. Yeah.
All right. That was one I didn't look up. I looked up the other colleges, but I think I looked up the college baseball, but there just wasn't anything super interesting to touch on. But I did not think to look up college hockey, so that's on me.
So I think with that, we probably want to talk a little bit about college basketball in 1950.
Yeah, and there's a lot here. So you have to set sort of the kind of level set college basketball and the environment, because it is college basketball had been around for 20 years or so at that point. No, more than that, right? The teens?
30, yeah. I mean, I'm 30. Looking at this same cavalcade of basketball book that I used when we did our, I think it was when we did our 1923 episode, actually. This has season summaries going all the way back to, the teens. So, yeah, I think Fog Allen started coaching in the teens. So, yeah, it goes back that far.
All right, but I think the first NCAA tournament or NCAA was 1939, I want to say.
Correct.
Was Oregon won in 1939.
Yes.
So, we're in the sort of nascent days, but college basketball is very popular. It's also very popular in big cities, particularly New York. We're still, in a lot of ways, in the New York, the era, and it would end very shortly after this for a number of reasons, but the era where New York City, it lasted a little while longer where Madison Square Garden was still the center of college basketball. But here we're still in an era where New York City itself and teams from the New York City area, a lot of whom are players from the New York City area, are still sort of the epicenter of college basketball in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is all a prelude to say the top line story of the of college basketball in 1950 is that CCNY, City College of New York, wins both the NIT and the NCAA tournament. And now I know a little bit. Sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say one of the interesting things that I didn't realize till I was researching is they beat the same team in the finals of both.
So I know a little bit about this era from LaSalle a couple of years after this, because LaSalle won the NIT in 1952 and they won the NCAA tournament in 1954. And I always kind of laugh because people go, well, they won the NCAA tournament in 1954 and they won the NIT in 1952. And the NIT was bigger the NIT was the bigger tournament back then. So that's a national championship. And it's like, but what about 54? It's like, well, that's the NCAA. It's like you kind of it switched in 1953. And again, I don't know enough about it, but the NIT was a huge deal. The NIT was not, you can't even compare it to what it was in the 70s. It was still a literally national invitational tournament. You got invited to play in that. It was almost apart. It was totally apart from the NCAA tournament. And they didn't play at the same time, obviously.
Yeah, because wasn't it the fact that they won the NIT? Wasn't that what got CCNY into the NCAA?
Yes, yeah. So they won the NIT. I'll pull up the exact dates. They won the NIT in what was the? I'm just looking for the schedule here. See if they have the actual games. But it was like the week before the NCAA tournament. So that was like just enough time, or maybe it was 2 weeks before. But that was, by winning that, they were able to get like the last spot in the NCAA tournament and get into take one of the last spots in the NCAA tournament and then win it.
So maybe we should just talk a little bit about who this team is and what CCNY is. They're coached by a guy named Nat Holman, who's a basketball Hall of Fame coach. He started coaching the team all the way back in 1919 and was there till 52 and then sporadically throughout the 50s. He was a great player in and of itself. He was one of the original Celtics, which we've talked about them a little bit before. They were a New York-based professional basketball team, and professional basketball in those days sort of consisted of a combination of ad hoc leagues that would spring up for a year or two, tournaments throughout the season, and then also a lot of barnstorming. And he was a professional player until the early 30s, even though he was the coach of CCNY until starting in 1919. CCNY was a public school in New York City, sort of like today you have state school systems in every state. This was, and this still exists in New York City to this day too, but this was the city school system. And I believe that it was free for anybody, either anybody in New York City or anybody in New York City who qualified academically. And it was a really, really good academic college for people in New York City who probably would not be getting a college education otherwise. And that also include a lot of ethnic people, a lot of sons of and daughters of immigrants, although I shouldn't say daughters. I don't know if it was co-ed at that point. I think it was. And then a lot of black schools. And in fact, black students, I should say. One of the notable things about CCNY in the 49-50 season is that they were the first team to win the NCAA tournament with a black player in its starting lineup, and the starting lineup was 2 black and 3 Jewish players, and they were led by a senior, one of the Jewish players, a guy by the name of Erwin Dambrot. Nat Holman called him the greatest player he had ever coached, and they go on to defeat Bradley, Bradley out of Indiana, in both the NIT and the NCAA championships.
But by the way, Erwin Dambrot was one of the Jewish players, not one of the black players.
Did I say he was one of the black players?
No, I was joking. As well, by the way, Alvin Roth was also one of the Jewish players. No, not one of the black players. So they go 17-5 in the regular season. But they weren't in the AP top 20. Team is actually, it's a lot of younger guys. I think most of the guys on this team were sophomores, actually.
Yeah,
so
other than Dambrot, they were all sophomores.
So they play in the NIT is 12 teams, as well as the NCAA, I believe. And let me give you the let me see if I can give you the teams that are in the NIT. This is the NIT. So your 12 teams in the NIT are Arizona, Bradley, CCNY, Duquesne, Kentucky, LaSalle, Long Island, Niagara, St. John's, San Francisco, and Western Kentucky are your 12 teams. CCNY in their first game plays San Francisco, who I believe had won it the year before. They beat them. They beat them solidly. They beat them by 19. Then they take on Kentucky, who even then is a blue blood. Kentucky was ranked number 3 in the country. They won the last 2 NCAA championships. They had a 7-footer, which for 1951 or 1950 it's rare now. It's certainly super rare in 1950. This thing also points out that Kentucky's a racially segregated school, as you would imagine, in 1950, playing in the SEC. That they were not alone on that.
And that was Adolph Rupp by that point.
Mm-hmm. Several Wildcats refused to shake hands with the black and Jewish CCNY players before the game. They beat the crap out of Kentucky 89-50. This thing says worst ever defeat for an Adolph Rupp coach team. So they are now, and Kentucky, by the way, won the NCAA in 48, 49, and 51. So they win the next year. In the semifinal round, they beat Duquesne 65-52. I would like to point out that Duquesne, the round before, had snuck by the Larry Faust-led Explorers 49-47. So had LaSalle gotten by Duquesne, this would have been LaSalle in this game against CCNY. They beat Duquesne, and that sets up the match with Bradley in the NIT championship game, and they win that. They win that by a 69-61 margin, with Ed Warner awarded the most valuable player of the tournament.
And that gets them into the NCAA, right?
It says after CCNY's run to the MIT title, the Beavers were immediately selected to participate in the NCAA tournament. The 1950 NCAA tournament field will give you that. Some of these are going to be a lot of the same teams. You got from the East, it's Ohio State, Holy Cross, North Carolina State, and CCNY. And from the West, it's going to be Baylor, Bradley, BYU, and UCLA are your. Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. There's only 8 teams.
Only 8 teams. The one thing I notice is that unlike the NIT, other than North Carolina State, there are no Southern schools, where I feel like in the NIT there were a couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's and then the other thing that was interesting to me that I did not even realize was that John Wooden was already at UCLA that early.
Yeah, that kind of caught me off guard. I guess 48-49 was his first year there. So this would have been his.
He's in his second year.
He's in his second year there as the head coach, and he would be there until 1975. Or I think the other reason was you had to win your conference back then to get in. So or be so like the Ohio State's the Big Ten. Holy Cross is an independent. NC State is the Southern Conference. CCNY, Metro NY. Baylor is the Southwest. Bradley, Missouri Valley. BYU, the Mountain States, and UCLA, the Pacific Coast.
So maybe I shouldn't be reading as much into it as I am that there aren't as many Southern schools, because it's really, even in the NIT, there's only, I guess you could consider Kentucky, Western Kentucky, and if you really want to stretch the definition of Southern, you could say Arizona. But yeah.
Well, and Baylor is a Southern school. It's just Texas.
I didn't hear.
Thing.
Okay, so and maybe that's more sort of just a reinforcement of your point that a big reason for this is what we're going to talk about in a minute here. But this was sort of the last gasp of college basketball being heavily centered in the Northeast and in New York in particular.
I don't know if I would say it was the last gasp of it being based in the Northeast, but
for 30 years it is.
Well, not that started 4 years later. That ended 4 years later.
You mean after LaSalle wins in 54?
Yeah, because they're the last Eastern team to win, I think, for like a long time. Like Northeastern.
I think it's still Georgetown wins in 84, right?
Maybe, yeah.
We've talked about this on an episode before. When we did our 1984 episode. Yeah, It was the first from an East Coast. I don't know how it was being defined, but yeah, last time for 30 years when LaSalle wins in 54. So we got two more things we got to do on college basketball. I just wanted to
hang on. Let me just give their NCAA tournament run because we didn't actually
go ahead.
Do that
yet.
Yet.
Absolutely.
So they beat Ohio State 56-55 in the first round, the quarterfinals. Then they beat NC State 78-73. They get Bradley again. They beat them 71-68. Erwin Dambrot is the tournament's most outstanding player. Nat Holman appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. I believe he played She Loves You. And then CCNY's victory voted the most exciting event in the history of college basketball at Madison Square Garden. I don't know when that was, but I believe at that time I would believe it.
Just real quick, even though they don't really come into play in the championships, a few really big future NBA greats are All-Americans this year, including the starting backcourt of the All-American NCAA team is two guys who end up being a Hall of Fame starting backcourt with the Celtics, and that's Bob Cousy and Bill Sharman of Holy Cross in Southern California. And then one of the forwards is Paul Arizin of Villanova. And I believe that I know that Arizin and Cousy both go out for the draft the following year. They're all seniors. In fact, the entire All-American team is 9 of the 10 guys are seniors. So yeah, Cousy, Arizin, and Sharman both leave school when they graduate the following year and get drafted into the NBA. I guess we should just talk real quick about the aftermath of CCNY.
Yeah, and this is a wide-ranging thing that happened. It wasn't just CCNY, but it's most closely associated with them. And I don't. There's lots and lots of articles, and I don't want to just repeat Wikipedia, but it came down most specifically on New York City area basketball and CCNY in particular. And what it turns out is that players over the course of many years, including this 1950 season, really from the late 40s on, was that they were shaving points, which for the uninitiated means essentially you will still try to win the game, but you will try to not cover the spread. So if you're CCNY and you're favored by 7 points, if you're in on shaving points, you're going to try and lose by less than 7 or win by less than 7. And the thought behind this is players who are ultra competitive, who may not want to throw a game, because that's also a whole nother level of both selling yourself out and a whole nother level of trouble if you get caught. Whereas we were supposed to win by 7, we won by 3. What's the difference? You know, that's what point shaving is, literally shaving, trying to not affect the outcome, but still, not cover the spread, basically.
And CCNY is discovered to have been, like you said, one of the major culprits. And I think one of the things I read, it even came out that there were 1 or 2 games where they were shaving and then ended up losing because they couldn't strike that balance of winning the game but not covering the spread, and they lost without meaning to.
So this came, the thing that really made this come to a head was actually, and this is interesting, it was a doubleheader in December of 1950, which would have been the next season. And both games of this doubleheader, CCNY was trying to shave points but ended up losing. So, like, they lost the game. So for the gamblers, it was good, but for them, they shaved too many points and lost. And then the later game in that doubleheader was Long Island University, who double-crossed the people that they were making a deal with, who maybe they were getting screwed, and won. So neither game went the way exactly it was supposed to go, but that was one of the games that sort of made it come to a head. 3 City College players were eventually implicated after authorities wiretapped the phones of another former college basketball player who was acting as a liaison between players and gamblers. On February 17th, 1951, CCNY had just played a game against Temple. They were returning to New York by train. Train pulled into Penn Station. The players were met by detectives. They were taken downtown to the district attorney's office for interrogation. This is also, again, when was Miranda versus Arizona? That was in the 60s, right?
I don't know. I'll look that up real quick.
They're interrogated in separate rooms for hours. The players are not allowed to call attorneys. They're not even allowed to call their parents. Finally, after hours of questioning, they break and they confess to having shaved points in 3 games during that season. And literally overnight, they've gone from heroes to villains. 3 City College players were arrested that evening, 4 more later on. In total, 32 players from 7 different schools confessed their involvement in point shaving. Bookmaker Harry Gross pled guilty to 66 counts of gambling and bribery and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And then just the button on this. In the following years, most schools involved, like Kentucky and Bradley, rebounded from the incident. City College was never stripped of its championships, but it was banned from Madison Square Garden and eventually dropped down to Division III. And I believe they are the only team that's ever won an NCAA championship in basketball that is not currently even a Division I school anymore.
Yeah, and that also sort of, and I just over vacation a couple weeks ago read a book on the history of the NBA that was written in the early 70s. So it was about the first 25 years in the NBA. And it's kind of cool because usually you read a history of the NBA and it's like the vast majority of it is sort of 80s and beyond. So it was kind of cool to read a 250-page book about the NBA that focused so much on the 50s, 60s, that type of thing. And it sort of weirdly coincides with the growth of the NBA, and the Knicks get really good in the early 50s. In fact, I think the next 2 years, that's who Minneapolis beats in the finals. And so just as CCNY and college basketball are fading away, the Knicks are coming into the third Madison Square Garden to kind of take their place.
And just a couple more things on the nature of this scandal. So parallel to the January 51 case that led to the arrests, a report released by the Brooklyn Eagle in February 51 revealed that the NYPD had been suppressing around 40 recordings of telephone conversations before, during, and after the 1949-1950 season that detailed accounts of substantial fix involving players from every major college in and around New York City. Further investigations revealed that bookie Harry Gross and his brother Frank Gross had engaged in widespread bribery and manipulation of city police. The Gross scandal eventually resulted in the resignation of Mayor William O'Dwyer, Police Commissioner William O'Brien, and various other officers who accepted bribes. So this actually ended up bringing down a mayor, actually the mayor that succeeded Fiorello LaGuardia.
And there's a great documentary, an HBO documentary that might even be around on YouTube or whatever, called City Dump, which is a great... HBO has done some great sports documentaries through the years, and this is one of them. It's called City Dump, and it's the story of this team and this scandal. And so highly recommend that you check it out.
And the last thing, this O'Dwyer, the mayor, having to resign, this actually, in addition to sort of ending the era of basketball, New York dominated college basketball, it ended the era where a New York City mayor would ever be involved in a corruption scandal ever again.
Yeah, well, there's that. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to baseball in 1950.
We are, and this is not a year that you necessarily, at least I have not necessarily read or talked about a lot in the past. It's the second year of the Yankees, what would end up being the Yankees' 5 straight run that would bridge the gap between Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle. It's also the year that the Phillies win their first pennant in 35 years. 1915 was the last pennant they'd won at this point. Yeah. So it's not, especially when you compare it to other years in this era, 41, 47, 49, even 50, certainly the next year in 51, that lots and lots, and then all the Dodgers stuff that lots and lots of people have talked about. This isn't one you necessarily hear a ton about, but it's classic era baseball. So I'm certain there's plenty of stuff to cover, right?
There is, and the Yankees had won the World Series in 49. They had won the pennant, Casey Stengel's first year, and they had just narrowly beaten out the Red Sox, and they in fact had to win the last 2 games of the 1949 season against the Red Sox at Yankee Stadium to pull ahead to win the pennant. They had then gone on to beat the Dodgers in, I think that was a 5-game World Series in 1949. In 50, you start to see it's a much better year for the American League. The 4 teams in the American League actually have a better record than the pennant-winning 1950 Philadelphia Phillies, and that's the Yankees with 98, the Detroit Tigers with 95, the Red Sox with 94, who in sort of the 1950 is McCarthy's last year as Red Sox manager. He actually never manages in baseball again after the 1950 season. And then even the Cleveland Indians with 92 wins. And so you have, and then you got 4 teams with 67 wins or less. So you have a 25-game difference between 4th place and 5th place in the American League in 1950. And then in the National League, you got the Philadelphia Phillies with 91 wins, winning, like you said, their first pennant in 35 years, and then they wouldn't win another one for another 30 years. So we can talk a little bit maybe about the details of some of these teams here if you just give me a minute. I want to concentrate obviously mostly on the 2 pennant winners, but just bear with me here for 1 second. Like I said, we mentioned the Yankees as the American League champions and the eventual world champions. We'll get to them in a minute. The Detroit Tigers 95 win team. This is not a lot of names you'd really know here. Hall of Famer George Kell is their starting third baseman. He leads the league in hits with 218 hits, bats .340 on the year, and then they have a starting pitcher. One of the starting pitchers on the team is a guy named Hal Newhouser, who's a Hall of Fame pitcher, had been a back-to-back MVP during the World War II years. And then, like I said, you got Boston. This is the classic year of Boston. Actually, I should mention Joe McCarthy actually leaves the Red Sox after about 60 games, and this is the Red Sox team of Ted Williams, although Williams only plays 89 games. Is this when he leaves? Would this be when Williams leaves for Korea? I think it might be.
Yeah, that would make sense. I think 50 was when it really started to ramp up.
But it's not actually. No, this must have been an injury for him that year because he plays 148 games the following year, and then in 52 he only plays 6 games, and then in 53 he only plays 37. So yeah, this is actually not not when Williams is in Korea. He's just hurt, but despite him only playing in a little over half the games, they still win 94. This is Dom DiMaggio, Joe Cronin. Actually, is Cronin? Cronin might not be there anymore. I'm sorry. No, Cronin's actually moved up. Cronin's the general manager in 1950, so he's not a player anymore in 1950. And then you got the Cleveland Indians, who had been the world champions the 2 years before. Larry Doby, former Yankee Joe Gordon, still at 35 years of age. Satchel Paige is gone by 50, but you got Bob Lemon, Bob Feller, Early Wynn, 3 future Hall of Fame pitchers. So the Yankees, they only win it by 3 games, but I don't know. I'm going to look up here in a second, but I don't believe it's ever in doubt. I think this is not something that necessarily goes down to the wire for the Yankees in the 1950 season.
Yeah, I think they have a decent lead, and then they end up only beating the Tigers by 3 games. But I think I don't think it's like they have to edge them out. I think it might have come down from 6 or 7. But if you want to check into that, I'm always go ahead. Sorry,
good. No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say I like to. There's not any big rule changes for this season. One that's interesting is that they codify this, even though this had not happened since 1914, but they codified that the home team must bat second in the bottom of the inning. Prior to this, the manager or the captain had preference whether they would bat first or second, but it says here a major league team did not feature a home team in the top of the inning since 1914. They also the pitching mound has to be 15 inches. Before that, it said it was a maximum of 15 inches, but they didn't say what the minimum was. And then they just standardized the size of gloves and stuff like that. So really not any real significant rule changes for this year.
So I'm just looking here at sort of a recap of the Yankees season, and it looks like they against Boston on September the 23rd, Eddie Lopat beats Boston by a score of 8-0, and that seems to be what I guess clinches the pennant for the Yankees. I don't know if they wouldn't have officially clinched it then, but this account makes it seem like that was sort of the clinching. This series against the Red Sox, where they beat the Red Sox back to back on the 23rd and 24th to go up 2.5 games. And it says after that game they breezed home with the pennant. Just to talk about a little bit about the Yankees that year. DiMaggio had actually wanted to retire before the 49s or before the 50 season. Yankee management talks him into staying for the 50 season. He actually ends up staying both for 50 and 51. This is an MVP year for Phil Rizzuto, who hits .324 and wins the AL MVP award. And kind of Rizzuto was always not the biggest offensive threat for the Yankees. That was always DiMaggio and Berra and guys like Tommy Henrik and Joe Gordon when he was there. But even though he's 32 years of age, Phil Rizzuto has this weird sort of one shining season where he wins the MVP award. And I would be willing to bet that Phil Rizzuto, he actually had been second in MVP voting to Williams the year before. But other than that, the highest he ever gets is like 6th. So for 1 year, Phil Rizzuto is maybe the best player in the American League.
Yeah, and we talk about like the Yankees in a lot of ways from the early 20s until the late 60s when the quote unquote dark ages begin it's almost defined in 4 eras, and really in a lot of ways 3, because they don't necessarily give Gehrig the credit he deserves for his own era. But basically it's like it went from Ruth to Gehrig to DiMaggio to Mantle. And certainly chronologically that's true. But really by 1950, although I have to admit, DiMaggio's numbers were better in 1950 as I was looking at those stats than I was expecting them to be.
He hits 300, yeah.
Yeah, at 35, and considering, like you said, he was about to retire, he didn't only played 76 games in 1949. He hits 300. He has, I believe, 122 RBIs and 32 home runs. He's finishes ninth in MVP voting, which I mean, ninth is ninth, but much better than you would expect. He really this era. I mean, maybe in 1950 specifically, Phil Rizzuto won the MVP, but really at this point, the best player on these Yankee teams is Yogi Berra.
By far.
Yeah. When did Berra win MVPs?
Berra won them in 51. I want to say 51, 54, and 55.
I believe
I was correct about that.
I believe he finishes in second in 1950 to his teammate.
This says third.
Okay. Maybe it is third. And I just
second was Billy Goodman, who was a Red Sox infielder. Red Sox infielder. I want to just talk a little bit real quick about Rizzuto. He actually has another Hall of Famer to thank for his MVP season, and that's Johnny Mize, who's a National League veteran who would join the Yankees for the 49 season. And then there's two things that Rizzuto credits him with. First of all, Rizzuto says that he used to grip his bat too hard, and Mize noticed that and suggested that Rizzuto adopt a spread stance, widening the distance between his feet, and Rizzuto says that seems to improve his hitting. And then also he was having trouble at the plate, and Mize suggests that Rizzuto try Johnny Mize's bat, and Johnny Mize is a big, strong, strapping first baseman, home run hitter, once hit 50 home runs in a season. But Rizzuto tries the bat. The first at bat, it was he said the first time he used it, we were playing Washington, and he tried to duck away from the pitch. The ball hits the bat, goes into center field for a line drive single, and from then on, Rizzuto uses Johnny Mize's bat and ends up with 200 hits, 324 average, and an MVP award in 1950. The other thing about the Yankees is this is the era of the big three in their pitching rotation, and that's Allie Reynolds and Vic Raschi, two right-handers, and Eddie Lopat, who was known as the junk man, who was a junk ball pitcher. He was a lefty, change of pace kind of guy. And they sort of trade off throughout these seasons in the 5 championships in a row. This was Raschi's year to really star. He was 21-8, made the All-Star team, led the league with a .724 winning percentage. And then the other thing that's worth noting is that there are two guys who joined the team in the 1950 season for the very first time. The first of those is Billy Martin, who comes up and plays in 34 games at the age of 22. And the fourth is a future Hall of Famer, great left-hander by the name of Whitey Ford.
Yeah, and Ford plays. What does Ford play like? Very briefly in 50, or I guess he doesn't know. He makes.
I know he's got a 9-1 record. Yeah. I think he makes 10 starts, or
he makes 12 starts. He appears in 20 games. He's got a 9-1 record with a 2.81 ERA. So he's not one of the main starters, but he starts the tied for 5th most games behind all those guys you mentioned, Raschi, Reynolds, Lopat, and Byrne, who all make basically 30 starts or one or two more than 30 starts. It's just interesting because the next 2 years he's off the team because of military service. So it's weird. He's on this 50 team, but then after that he's gone until 53 when he comes back, and at which point he's kind of steps pretty quickly into being the Whitey Ford ace level pitcher that we think of from the 50s and 60s.
Ford is cocky right from the beginning. He and I think, and I'm going to try and look this up in a second, I think during the 50 pennant race, before he gets called up, he's like sending messages to Stengel saying, if you want to win the pennant, call this Ford kid up and he can get it done for you. And I didn't realize this. He actually, in 1950, because this is the only year that they're teammates, he he befriends Joe Page, who's the great reliever of the Yankees, who had actually had his best year in 47, and we did a whole episode on the 47 World Series if you want to check that out. But and this is a story. Page is 33, Ford is 21. They go to the fights in Chicago, and after dinner they go to a night spot, and about 3 o'clock in the morning they were knocking on the door of something called the Airline Club, even though it was locked. They kept knocking on the door. Somebody wouldn't let them in. And the next day, Eddie Lopat, who I guess had thought that it was his job to maybe look over Ford a little bit, comes up to Ford and says, "Did you go out last night?" And Ford says, "Yeah, I went to the fights with Joe, and then we went to bed." But Lopat calls him a liar because Lopat had been inside the Airline Club when Ford and Page were knocking on the door trying to get in.
Well, that's one way to out yourself, is to the guy who's supposed. I guess really though, we can't claim the high ground if he was in there already.
Mm-hmm. So their opponents are you good to move on to the National League?
Yes.
Their opponents in the 1950 World Series are the Philadelphia Phillies, known as the Whiz Kids because they got a lot of young guys on the team, including 23-year-old Richie Ashburn, who's the center fielder, future Hall of Famer. The shortstop is 23. Third baseman is 24. The pitching staff is led by another young guy, two young guys actually, Robin Roberts, who's a future Hall of Famer who goes 20-11 with 5 shutouts, and a lefty by the name of Kurt Simmons, who's 17-8 at 21 years of age. Every regular pitcher but one is under the age of 26. But perhaps their best pitcher is actually their closer, who is Jim Constantine, who is, and they don't really count saves in those days, but this is a guy who appears in 74 games, finishes 62 of them, saves 22, and actually is named MVP of the National League for the 1950 season, beating out guys like Stan Musial, Ralph Kiner. And if you just think about 49, the MVP is Jackie Robinson. In 51, it is, I believe, Stan Musial, but give me a chance to. No, it's actually not Musial. Who's the NL MVP? Oh, it's Campanella, of course. Campanella wins it in 51. But in between those two legends, you have Jim Constantine, the Philadelphia Phillies closer. They win the pennant late in the season when Dick Sisler, who is the son of Hall of Fame first baseman George Sisler, hits a home run off of Don Newcomb to defeat the Brooklyn Dodgers. I believe that's the last game of the season. It might be the second to last game of the season, but nonetheless, this miracle team, the only non-New York. Oh no, this is what it was. Because I was thinking of this the other day. This is the only time between 47 and 1960 when it's not the Braves, the Giants, or the Dodgers in the World Series is 1950 with Phillies, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because 47, 48. I mean, most of those are the Dodgers, but yeah, you're right.
But no, like 2 for the Giants, 3 for the Braves.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, to point out, the Phillies were coming off of, in the 40s, the Phillies had the worst winning percentage in baseball in the 40s. I have this list here. They finished in the first division once, which means they finished in 4th or higher once in the entire decade of the 40s. They were 584 and 951, which is good for a 380 winning percentage throughout the entire decade of the 40s. Do you want to guess who was second?
It's just in the National League or the whole?
All of baseball.
In the 40s?
The whole decade.
Who was bad? I'm trying to think who didn't make the World Series. I want to say Washington.
Washington is third. Washington had a 441 win percentage, but actually did. So the next three, the third, fourth, and fifth place teams all finished in the first division 3 times, although probably a lot during the war years. And that was Washington, the Browns, and the White Sox, who all had winning percentages in the mid fours. The second worst team in the entire 40s was the Philadelphia A's, who were 638 and 898. So the two worst teams in 20 baseball seasons in Philadelphia over the course of the entire decade of the 40s, they played to about a 400 win percentage, and the two of them combined to finish in the top half of the league twice.
Jeez. Yeah, and you wonder why it was a question which one of them was going to leave in the 50s.
Yeah.
So do we want to move on and talk a little bit about the and just, you know, as we mentioned, both let me just maybe just look at the awards here. Obviously there's no Cy Young yet, but the MVPs are both from the two World Series teams, Constantine with the Phillies and Rizzuto with the Yankees. Rookies of the year, which had just been started given out a few years previously, Walt Dropo with the Boston Red Sox, who leads the league in RBIs as a rookie. Actually, I don't know a lot about this guy, but he was a rookie at 27 years of age in 1950. It's his only all-star team, and he basically kind of kicks around various mediocre teams in Major League Baseball for the rest of the 50s. And then the NL Rookie of the Year is actually an interesting one. It's a guy by the name of Sam Jethro, who is much better known for his time in the Negro Leagues. He's a 33-year-old rookie for the Boston Braves in 1950. Leads the league. He actually leads the league back-to-back years in stolen bases, 1950 and 1951. But he hits .273 with the Braves, plays in 141 games, sort of an unspectacular, a decent, if not, but not spectacular rookie season in 1950 for the Braves. And he's a Braves regular for 3 years in 1952. And then basically it probably goes back to either retires or goes back to barnstorming. But that's the award outlook in 1950. And I don't know if there was anything else you want to touch on before we get to the World Series.
Just that I looked, and the Negro leagues are pretty much all but dead at this point.
I was going to mention this at the end, so go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just I looked to see, and I mean, obviously you knew it was a pretty quick drop off, but I think by 1950, it's like you really can't even find anything. I think they were considered pretty much entirely minor league by that point, right?
A couple of years ago, when Major League Baseball made the decision to count Negro League seasons and teams and players and everything as major leagues, they went up through 48. So yeah, so this was by the only thing I could find on Baseball Reference is just a very quick blurb here. The Kansas City Monarchs won the first half of the West Division, but declined to meet the American Giants. I assume that means the Chicago American Giants. The Monarchs had sold several of their better players to the majors, the white major leagues, and had lost several more to Latin American leagues. Manager Buck O'Neill forfeited the division title when, rather than field a non-representative team, the Clowns, which I assume is the Indianapolis Clowns. The Indianapolis Clowns defeated the Chicago American Giants in a brief championship series. I'm a little curious here because something is off here, and I don't know what it is, because the Chicago American Giants are listed with a 15-31 record. And even if you split the season into two halves, they would have had to have basically lost every game in the first half to win enough games in the second half to get to the, to be a World Series, to be a division winner. So I don't know, maybe more examination needs to be done on that, but that's,
well, you can do that.
that is the sort of the dying days of what we think of as the Negro Leagues in the 1950 season.
And then just sort of on that note, this World Series is the last World Series with two teams that are not integrated. Because the Yankees contributed to being one of the teams for a long time that hadn't integrated in the World Series, but you figure in 47 it was the Dodgers, 48 Cleveland had integrated, I don't know if the Boston Braves had not, because they did that this year. 49 was the Dodgers again. By 51, it's the Giants and then the Dodgers. And then by the mid 50s, most teams have integrated, except I think the Red Sox was like 81 or something.
59, but yeah.
This is also, it was the last World Series to have no American-born black players until 2022. So just kind of an alarming, not alarming, but wow, whatever, just a commentary on the decline of American-born black players in baseball now. But
but to be fair, though, in 2022, I think half the players are Latin American blacks, so it's not.
And it's not like they're not playing because they're banned. It's just there's not a lot of them playing anymore. But so do you want to get into the actual World Series?
Yeah, so I'll just run through, and I have a book here, and maybe I'll just kind of I'm not going to read through it, but give sort of brief summaries. Game 1, the Eddie Sawyer, who's the manager of the the manager of the Phillies, goes with a surprise. Even though Constantine had not started a game all season, he decides to start Jim Constantine in the opening game at Shibe Park. The Constantine pitches well, but Vic Raschi pitches better. They win. The Yankees win by a score of 1-0. It's the third straight World Series with a 1-0 opening game, which is an interesting statistic. The lone Yankee run comes in the fourth inning when Bobby Brown, third baseman, hits a double, and then they get 2 sac flies from Hank Bauer and Jerry Coleman. So the epitome of a pitcher's duel when the only run is scored by 2 sacrifice flies. The second game, the Phillies throw out Robin Roberts to pitch, Hall of Famer, against Allie Reynolds for the Yankees. This game goes to the 10th inning, tied at 1, when Joe DiMaggio hits a home run off of Roberts. It's his first hit of the 1950 series. I don't know if that's DiMaggio's last World Series home run, but that might be something that's worth taking a second to look up here.
And this is also, as I looked at it, I was like, wait a minute, what about 64? But then I remember the whole thing about 64. This is the last postseason game ever played at Shibe Park, because the A's would be gone in a couple of years. The Phillies didn't, by the time the Phillies made the playoffs again, they were playing at Veterans Stadium after this.
And DiMaggio does have another home run in the 51 World Series, so he's not completely done. And Jerry Coleman actually kind of almost makes an error in this game, so he's struggling in the field, but he's doing really well at bat, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. Game 3 is back at Yankee Stadium. 2 lefty pitchers, Eddie Lopat and a guy by the name of Kent Heilselman for the Phillies. Then, as ever, Yankee managers try and throw left-handed pitchers in World Series games to minimize the short fence in right field. Rizzuto scored, leads off the scoring on the third when Jerry Coleman again knocks him home with a single. But then the Phillies get a couple of runs in the 6th and the 7th. But then Heilselman walks 3 straight batters. He walks Coleman, Berra, and DiMaggio. Sawyer goes to the MVP. He goes to Jim Constantine, but there's an error, and that ties the game. And Jerry Coleman hits a game-winning single to score. I think it's to score Gene Woodling, and the Yankees win Game 3 by a run. And then in Game 4, and I'm just going to pull up the box score, Stengel names Whitey Ford as his Game 4 starter. And this is seen, not only has Ford been pitching well, but by this time they know that Ford has been drafted. He's going to go into the Army, and so they want to give him a World Series start before he misses a couple of years for military service. So Game 4 is the rookie Whitey Ford going up against a guy by the name of Bob Miller for the Philadelphia Phillies, and this one is a little bit less dramatic. This one is a 5-2 final. Yankees don't wait long. They jump out to a lead right in the first inning on an RBI single by Berra, and then an RBI double by DiMaggio to bring home Berra. They add a couple more runs in the sixth, 3 more runs, including a home run by Berra to make it 5-0. They take a 5-0 lead to the ninth inning, where the Phillies end up getting a couple of unearned runs. So Ford gives up 2 runs, but neither one of them is earned. He actually has to come out with 2 outs in the ninth, and Allie Reynolds gets the save. I believe the Yankees probably only use in this whole series. They only use 5 pitchers. So, which I mean, there have been I think there was one World Series in the 20s where the Yankees only used 3 pitchers, but nonetheless, yeah, they get 10 in the third. 10
that would almost had to have been 27, wouldn't it? The sweep.
I think it was actually 28 because that was also a sweep. So yeah, so Rashi pitches a complete game in his start. Reynolds pitches a 10-inning complete game in his start, plus comes in relief of Ford in game 4. Lopat goes 8 innings in his start. Ford goes 8 2/3, and then a reliever by the name of Tom Ferrick gets 1 inning. So Yankees win. They sweep the Phillies, and this is their only World Series sweep of this era. Because even in '61, they beat the Reds win a game from them in '61. And it's the only one of this 5 in a row that's not a Subway Series, and it's probably the least dramatic, but it's the best Phillies season for about 65 years. So
yeah, if you think about it, they won the pennant in 15, then they win the pennant in 50, and then they don't win the pennant again until 1980 when they win the World Series.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
they had some teams in the 70s that maybe got to the playoffs, but
yeah, I think in 77 I think they made it in 77 and 76. So
and then 64 they blew that huge lead.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's go ahead, sorry.
No, you're really kind of on the cusp of some things with baseball. You know, Mantle and Mays come into the league the following year, and Brooklyn really becomes the boys of summer. They make the World Series 52, 53, 55, 56. Giants and Dodgers rivalry starting. You talked about the fact that there's never an all-white World Series again. So not a World Series that gets talked about a lot, not a season that gets talked a lot, maybe especially outside of Philadelphia, who remembers their Wiz kids. But, there's some storylines there.
Yeah, and it's, like you said, it's sort of an interesting time with all of those pieces in place. You mentioned Mantle, by the way, and I looked, and he was hitting .383, but playing bad defense at shortstop in Class C Joplin, Missouri, in 1950.
From Class C to the World Series in a year, which is pretty impressive.
Yes.
So, all right, so maybe we ought to call it an episode here. This might end up having to be a 2-parter, I think, because we still got to do all the other sports, and then we got to do football, and there's a lot there for football. So maybe we call it here.
Okay.
All right. Well, we appreciate you all joining us as always. We made it through some technical issues that hopefully went unseen, but we appreciate it, and we will be back soon with the second half of the 1950 episode. Until then, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled, Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the 3 Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position, and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling is My Gimmick, by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.